everyone. My name is Marietta, and I'm joining you today virtually from Vancouver, Canada. Thank you for listening and joining my talk today. So, most of you probably know that I am a Python core developer. If you're not sure what it really means, I do have a talk that is titled What is a Python core developer? So you can look that up on YouTube. But the short summary is that if you have a pull request to the Python programming language. Hello everyone, my name is Marietta and I'm joining you today virtually from Vancouver, Canada. Thank you for listening and joining my talk today. So, most of you probably know that I am a Python core developer. If you're not sure what it really means, I do have a talk that is titled What is a Python core developer? So you can look that up on YouTube. But the short summary is that if you have a pull request to the Python programming language, I can merge it for you. It means that I have the commit privilege to CPython, so I'm one of the maintainers of one of the most popular programming language. And for my contributions to Python, I've received recognitions such as the Python's Software Foundation Community Service Award in 2018. I'm also a PSF Fellow member starting this year. I've been nominated twice for Google Open Source Peer Bonus Program, and I've been featured on GitHub as one of the maintainers for the GitHub Sponsors Program and the README project. The thing is, I'm really new at this. I've really only started contributing to open source really rather recently. I started in 2016. That was only 4 years ago. Since then, I've continued actively contributing to open source projects, and somehow I ended up with being given commit rights to other people's open source projects. And all of a sudden, I felt like I have a set of new responsibilities and I wasn't fully prepared for it all. So in this talk, I want to share my journey. How did I get here? I'll share what it's like being a brand new open source maintainer. I'll share some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the lessons that I've learned along this journey, and I'll also share why I've continued this path. I hope that by sharing my story, whether you're an aspiring new open source contributor or you're an experienced maintainer, I really hope you could do it all much better than me. So how did this happen? Like, a lot of people have been asking me how to even get started contributing. Like, they seem to not even know how to start. People wanted to know if I have any tips or secrets to share with them. And I'm glad to hear your enthusiasm for getting into open source. The thing is, really for me, it happened quite suddenly. One day I was just making my first pull request in 2016. By the end of that year, I got commit rights to 2 projects, to the Koala project in October and to the Python.org project in December 2016. And shortly after that, I got the commit right to CPython in early 2017. And since then, I've kept this all up, and now I'm a member of various open source projects. But let's backtrack a little bit. Like, the real question is this: like, what motivated me into contributing to open source? If I've been a long time user of Python, like, why did all of a sudden I became inspired and want to start contributing and start giving back to the community? So it's a long story. It began in 2015. I attended PyCon Montreal back then. It was my first ever PyCon, and I went to Guido van Rassem's keynote. In his keynote, he talked about how in the Python core team, there was no women at all. He had just attended Python language summit there. It was a room of 50 men, no women. And then he was offering to help mentor women into contributing to Python. When I heard this fact, I was shocked. Like, doesn't make sense, and it just felt wrong. But back then, I didn't really do anything about this. At that time, I felt curious about this. Like, how could this even happen? At that time, I didn't think it's my problem. It was Python's problem and not mine. So I also didn't think like there was anything I could do about it. A year later, I went back to PyCon. Honestly, I was kind of hoping to hear like who are the new Python core developers, the new women Python core developers now. But instead, Guido went on stage and admitted that there were still no women in the team. And he renewed his offer that he was willing to mentor even more women. And that's when it really hit me that there is a problem, and it wasn't a technical problem. There is a barrier, a certain barrier that in the open source community, in the Python community, that for like 20 years, for more than 20 years, all the core developers have all been men. There is a diversity problem. And if I had thought that before it wasn't my problem, that time I realized that this is a problem I care a lot about and I wanted to do something about it. Um, but back then I didn't know what I could even do. I mean, I could just complain. I could just point fingers and say, hey, Python, there's a diversity problem in your community and you gotta fix it. But I also didn't think that's a productive thing. So I thought, maybe I could give this a try and start contributing to Python and to open source. So I wrote an email to Guido van Rossum and asked for mentorship. I felt really lucky that he actually replied. And I asked for his advice. I told him I've never actually contributed to open source before. So here was some of his early advice to me. First, he suggested that, focus on modules that I found interesting. Then check out the repository, check out the contributing guide. And if I had trouble following the documentation, the guide, if the documentation was not clear, then I should just start by helping improving the documentation. He also suggested to go and check out the bug tracker and start looking at issues and work on issues. So I get started on it, finding modules that interest me. The thing is, initially, I didn't find the CPython project too interesting. I went in, I subscribed to the bug tracker, I checked out the code, but it feels like nothing in the code base made sense to me. Like I felt like there is nothing here I could contribute to. I didn't feel like I'll be able to help with anything at all. So I started thinking more broadly, like if I couldn't contribute to Python, that's fine. Maybe I could just start by contributing to some other projects. I thought that maybe it would be easier if it's a project where I have some familiarity, where instead of trying to learn an entire new project and code base, I could focus on making use of the existing skills that I already have. And that's when I shifted my attention to python.org project. Python.org is a website, an open source project built with Django. It was something that I was familiar with. I was already a Django developer in my day job. So when I checked out the code base for python.org, unlike when I opened the CPython code base, like I felt at home. This project seems to make more sense to me. So instead of feeling intimidated, I felt like I could be valuable to this project, that I could contribute. So I focused my attention to the python.org project. In general, whether I'm contributing to CPython or to any project, one of the first steps is still the same. Check out the repo and read the contributing guide. If there is no contributing guide, or if it's not up to date, you can start and help and improve this documentation. So now that I found a project that I could contribute to, And in my mind, I was thinking about, okay, let's quick, I want to find an issue that I can work on. Let's go through the issue tracker. Uh, but over the time, something that I've learned is that often it's not about finding an issue. Sometimes it's about waiting for an issue that I could help with. Sometimes the thing or the problem that I have the skill to help with hasn't been reported or hasn't arisen. There's no need for it yet. So what I did instead, I start watch watch and subscribe to the repository, and instead of fixating on trying to create pull requests, I ended up reviewing the existing open issues. I help reviews pull requests. Even if it's something I wasn't familiar with, I would still try to join in the discussion. Like I would be asking questions, or sometimes I would help just verify whether this bug is still happening or not. And sometimes it's just a matter of nobody has had time to review it, and as a new contributor, helping pushing old tickets and old pull requests are helpful to the maintainers. And in fact, this is how I was given commit right to the Koala project and to the python.org project. It wasn't because I made tons of pull requests to those repositories. It's because they noticed, the other maintainers, they noticed my activity there. I think they saw that I cared about the project just as much as they do. And from there, they decided that they could trust me and give me the commit privileges. As I've gotten more active in the open source project, I realized that becoming a contributor to a project is just like starting as a new developer at a tech company. When you start at a new job, the first few days or even weeks, you'll probably be in the onboarding or training sessions. And perhaps there's a senior engineer assigned to mentor you, to give you a walkthrough of the code base and everything. And after that, you get assigned a small task, and eventually you get more familiarized with the code base, and you can start implement big features on your own without help. Being a new contributor to open source projects is no different than that. It will take you time to understand the code base and the workflow before you can start making substantial big feature or a bug fix. The big difference is that there is no assigned mentor for you. Like there's no one who will walk you through the code base. I've never been given a walkthrough of the CPython report by Guido or by anybody else. It's just something that you have to do this on your own. And instead of spending full time training to get familiarized, you would do this in whatever free time you have available. And that's why it will take time to learn this code base. It will not be like a day or two. If you realize the CPython code base is about 30 years old, it's older than some legacy code base in most startups nowadays. And really, the contributing to open source is more than simply find an issue and make code changes. It's also about becoming part of the team, joining all the discussions forum and participate in all the discussions and all that. I think you shouldn't focus only on the open issues and the code and writing, making pull requests, and ignore the rest of the community. So let me now tell you what happened the first time I became a maintainer. Because all of a sudden, I found myself receiving lots of emails, because all of a sudden I got automatically added to various repositories within the organization. Even now, I'm still trying to figure out how to better manage my emails. I've learned a few tricks. But still, even now, every few days I found myself going to my inbox and look at the number of unread emails, and I was like, I close my eyes and I like, okay, I'm going to mark all of this as read. I don't care. I'm not reading. By the way, I'm sorry if I missed your email. Please send it again. um, and as a contributor, often my involvement ends after I made a pull request. So what happens to the pull request? I didn't have to be too invested too much. Whenever the maintainer have time, whenever they decide to accept my pull request, um, it's up to them. I didn't have to care about this. But now as a maintainer, I have to make that kind of decision, whether I want to merge it or not. And especially for a large project like CPython, often we really have to think about the long-term maintenance burden of accepting this pull request and how the change will impact the rest of Python users. Just because one person wanted this new feature and created a PR doesn't always mean that the rest of community wants it. So that's something that I realized that I have to start figuring out how to do. In addition to all of those, project maintainers have to deal with code of conduct issues within their project and moderate their communication channels, which is not easy. I don't think open source maintainers have to deal with this matter. Like, they have enough responsibilities. I think code of conduct committee should be a separate body, a separate group of people than the maintainers. But often this responsibility falls on the maintainers because maintainers are the one with the power to block users and to delete inappropriate comments from their repository. And on top of all those responsibilities, one of the roles of a maintainer is kind of representing on behalf of the project, becoming the spokesperson for the project. And I realized that I'm no longer speaking or acting just for myself, but on behalf of the community. How I choose to act and to behave becomes a reflection of the community that I belong to, and I always have to be mindful about this. And I've made mistakes. I made big mistakes. There was a time where I was making big decisions on my own, and by big, like, I meant I banned a user from the org, kind of big. Um, when you ban someone, you're rejecting them from your community. You're denying their involvement. It's a serious punishment. This is not in Python, but it was in a smaller community that I was in. There was a person who made inappropriate pull request. I found it disrespectful. I didn't want to trouble the rest of the community and the rest of maintainer having to continue interacting with this one person. So I went ahead and just immediately blocked the account. The thing is, it's really not the kind of decisions that I should have made on my own. I should have followed procedure, and if we have a COC in place, I should follow that and notify at least the other maintainers about this so we can act and react as a group and not just by myself. Rest assured, I'm much better at this now. But the biggest mistakes I've made was not managing my time wisely. People wonder, like, how do I even manage my time and my life? How do I have my work-life volunteer balance? And I really don't know. My life is still not balanced. I didn't have my priorities in the right order. There was a time that instead of attending my kids' school conference, my kids' school performance, I was in another country attending Python conference. I felt bad about it. I wasn't setting boundaries and rules for myself. I was giving too much time and energy to open source, and in the end, I burned out and I went through mental health issues. Despite all of that, despite of the troubles that I've endured, I'm still here. I'm still actively contributing to open source, and I've continued saying yes to help maintaining other open source projects. So why do I continue doing this? Believe it or not, if I contribute too actively to a project to the point of being given commit right, it's really because I really do care. I care a lot. Working openly in open source is unique. It's very different environment than working in a for-profit company. I get exposed to unique challenges not normally faced at work. And I get to learn about new libraries that people are building. I get to play with and use those learnings way faster than at work. For example, in my workplace, we were still using Python 2. We upgraded quite recently this year in the year 2020. But in my open source projects, I've been using F strings for years. I've really gained a lot from the community. Not only that, I'm continuously learning. I've received awards and recognitions, and all of those are valuable to me. I I have this sense of responsibility to pay it forward and to give back. Last year I attended Peter Wang's keynote at PyCon in Germany, and he said this quote as part of his keynote. He said, "In open source, the more you give, the more you get back," and I just find this really resonates with me a lot. Another reason why I'm continuing is that almost immediately when I first started, I found acceptance within this community. When I first emailed Guido and asked for help, I didn't need to prove anything to him. I didn't have to go to a day-long on-site interview in order to become a Python core developer. When I requested financial aid in order to attend PyCon, all I needed to do was ask. Somehow this community has accepted me, and for once in a long time, I feel like I belong here. And that sense of belonging is important to me. So that's my story. Now that you've learned about my journey and how I got here, I do have a few more words of advice for all of you aspiring open source contributors and me. First of all, when you are extended invitation to collaborate and maintain an open source project, ask, what is their expectation of you? Establish boundaries if there's any. Ask if there is anything you needed to do differently now that you have the commit privilege. I found that many open source projects that I've joined, they have really great contributing guides, which is a documentation aimed to help new contributors into contributing to the project, but they don't have maintenance guide. There is no new maintainer onboarding guide. Perhaps the thinking was that if somebody has contributed long enough to the project, perhaps they know everything about it already, so there is no need to have maintenance guide. But maintaining a project is not the same as contributing. And as I have described earlier, there are additional responsibilities, additional powers. So if the project doesn't yet have maintenance guide, I think you should start one, start documenting as you learned, and get onboarded. Projects should have succession plan in place. Perhaps there is an unwritten expectation that maintainers will be around for a long time. Only been open source for a few years. In my short time, I've seen various maintainers come and go. Even I've taken like month-long time off from open source in the past few years. Sometimes it's really not about maintainers who's completely retiring. People need to take time off. Maybe they're starting a family or starting a new job, have family emergency, or they got burnout and need to take some time off from everything. And it happens. It could happen suddenly anytime. There shouldn't be an aspect of the project that is owned by only one person. I know many open source projects, they come to conferences and they would host sprints and help new contributors contribute to their project. I think that's great. I would also recommend doing an annual sprint for the maintainers and for the experienced contributors. For example, Python has an annual core developer sprints where we would have one full week of focus time to focus on implementation and discussions, collaborations. The difference here is that we're really focused on the project itself and less on mentoring someone new. Um, and I know of remote companies who usually would have in-person all-hands meeting maybe once or twice a year, not during the pandemic. But even remote companies see value in having all their employees meet in person periodically. And your open source project should be no difference. Even if you can't all physically meet, you can organize a virtual sprint. Take a few days off from work and hack on your project. I know most open source maintainers are doing this for free, but getting funding wouldn't hurt. Maybe you need money to pay for private GitHub repository, or you need to pay for web hosting